Things Heard and Seen, out on Netflix now, starring Amanda Seyfried, James Norton, F. Murray Abraham, Rhea Seehorn, and Natalia Dyer. The film is based on a novel titled All Things Cease to Appear. I went into the film blind, just based on the cast, which is amazing, and I have to say I really loved it. And then I went online and saw that a lot of people were severely disappointed by it, and I think I know why that's the case. See, the movie was marketed as a straight horror, and it really isn't that. And I liked the fact that it defies the expectations, whereas I think a lot of people checked it out based on the trailer, believing it was going to be a much simpler and typical movie, and were unhappy when it wasn't. So the story opens with a quick sequence in the winter of 1980, suggesting that something terrible has happened. We then go back to the spring of that year and meet the family of Clares, Catherine and George Clare, played by Seyfried and Norton respectively, and their daughter Franny. George has just finished his dissertation and he was offered a teaching position at a small college in upstate New York. And the family decides to move out there from New York City, despite the fact that for Catherine specifically, this is a huge sacrifice. She has to abandon her career, her friends, her apartment, and so on. So they end up renting this large, beautiful old house that apparently has some sort of sinister history related to the previous families living there. And quickly it becomes apparent that the house is in fact haunted by some sort of a ghost. While at the same time the locals, including the college faculty, seem to know a bit more about that. And some of them are even interested in the spirit world and doing seances and so on and so forth. So this is like the opening 15 minutes of the film, and based on this premise, yes, it does look like it's going to be a very predictable horror film. And let me say again, it isn't. First of all, it does have supernatural elements typical to horror, and there are a couple of scary scenes, but they're not the main meat of the story, really. They're just a secondary element that enables us to explore the actual themes. And those themes are the ideas of an unhappy marriage and an exploration of being stuck in a relationship with someone who turns out to be a habitual pathological liar. This is another way that the movie defies expectations, I thought. A lot of the characters in the story turn out to be quite different than we would think they are when we first meet them. The most notable being the husband, George. Initially, he seems like an honest man just looking for success and recognition, kind of down on his luck, but certainly ambitious and loving his family, someone who cares about them and is a genuinely good guy. But the more we learn about him, the more details come to light from both his present and his past, the more despicable he becomes. And I have to say, it has been a while since I hated a character as much as I hated George. By the end of the film, I really just couldn't wait for him to finally get what he deserves. Credit where it's due, the character is written well, but also James Norton plays him very well. He does have this endearing smile, this way of being and talking. He makes it easy for us to instinctively like him, only to then reveal his true nature hidden underneath this positive demeanor. In some ways, I thought the journey of George was heavily inspired by and kind of mirrored Jack Torrance in The Shining. Family man goes insane, partly due to his own failings, partly maybe because of supernatural elements. Only in this case, I thought that that line of man versus the outside influence is much more blurred, I think. I also really liked the side characters in this film, particularly F. Murray Abraham as the faculty head and Rhea Seehorn as another teacher who befriends Catherine. They're both fantastically written, and it was incredibly refreshing to see, especially the character of Justine, played by Seehorn, who at every turn does the reasonable thing. It's common for me to get irritated in horror movies at characters being stupid. But here, every single time I thought she should do this one proper thing, she did exactly that right away. I also like the amount of details that are mentioned in the first half of the film, sort of in passing, only to be later revealed as quite important. Things don't really come out of nowhere, and when certain reveals happen, I was always like, oh, that makes sense. So this is what that dialogue meant 20 minutes ago. It's also a very feminist film at heart, I thought. We're meant to mostly sympathize with Catherine and view the story through her eyes, and I think that part works. We get to see how a woman can be trapped in an unhappy relationship with a without a good way out because of the expectations placed typically on the wife, especially as the movie takes place basically 40 years ago. We also see how George would prefer to see her almost as a nice accessory to have in his life, to be able to boast about, along with a nice country house and a cozy job at the college, but not really caring about her needs and wants so much as a human being. Crucially, though, I felt that the movie is feminist, but it doesn't hate men in general, if that makes sense. It's very clear that George himself is a horrible person and he's meant to be the clear antagonist as the story unfolds. But all the other male characters that appear are on pretty much on the other side of the spectrum. They're fairly positive and stand-up guys. Also, it was interesting to me when I noticed how the movie was shot. See, the story does create this atmosphere of isolation because of Catherine being pulled out of her old life, now being stuck in this house, not knowing people or the new place. But it's not exactly a physical isolation as much as we could expect from a straight horror film. She's still able to move around, drive to town, talk to people, search for information, make her own friends. And I think that the cinematography reflects that. Normally, in scenes which push physical isolation, you expect a lot of close-ups on the face, narrow shots, characters boxed in by the geometry of the frame. But here, a surprising amount of the, especially interior shots, are done with a very wide lens, showing almost entire rooms at once. I thought it was an interesting way to convey that this idea that the character still has some freedom of movement, even if she's trapped emotionally in a toxic marriage. Final point about the ending. I was not sold on it initially. I think it's pretty weird, pretty out there. But having thought about it some more, I think it does work within the context of the film, and I don't think you should take it 100% literally. There's some metaphorical things about it. I still think it could have been done better, and I don't think it's quite on the same high level as the rest of the film. But I don't think it ruins things completely. So yeah, overall, I really, really liked this film. I think it's very well written, even if the story takes like maybe like 2 or 3 shortcuts at some point, and it's brought to life by excellent performances. But most of all, I appreciated how fresh it felt by defying the expectations and being something completely different than the typical predictable haunted house horror that it initially seemed to be.